This discussion. It's very much of a discussion, a roundtable discussion on Occupy Wall Street, on the movement Occupy Wall Street. It's brought to you by a number of organizations here at Barton College, including the Hannah Arendt Center. My name is Roger Berkowitz. I'm the director of the Hannah Arendt Center. It's also sponsored by the Center for Civic Engagement here at Barton College and the Student Union. And Dan Danger wanted to say a couple words about the Student Union and help support this.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan.
So I want to thank Dan for really being very helpful in organizing the event, as well as Aaron Cannon over at the Center for Civic Engagement. We're going to try and speak for very little time up here, and that way leave time for us to hear your voices and answer questions and have a discussion to the extent possible. So I'm just going to let people speak, actually, probably in the order that they're up here, although I'll go last or wait to see if there's anything to be said at the end. So let me just introduce the people. We have Paul Marienthal, who I'm sure many of you know. He's the director of the Trustee Leader Scholar Program here at Bard, an amazing program that allows students, undergraduates, to really take leadership roles in trying to make the world a better place. Matt Constantino, who's a student here at Bard and has been involved in the Occupy Wall Street protest movement. Jennifer Derr, Professor Jennifer Derr from the History Department, who teaches Middle Eastern history, Middle Eastern studies, history and politics. Alitza Ray, who's another student here at Bard, again involved in the Occupy Wall Street movement. And then Stephen Maslow, who works on Wall Street and is also the chairman of the board of the Hannah Arendt Center here at Bard, who graciously took some time out of his day to come down and participate in the discussion with us. As I said, I'm Roger Berkowitz. I'm the director of the Hannah Arendt Center. Hannah Arendt, as many of you know, wrote quite a bit on revolution and on the importance of popular democracy. And we at the center have been very interested in and involved in thinking about the movement for the last 2 weeks. We've posted a number of articles about it on our blog, and many more are coming in the next couple of days. And if any of you would like to contribute either in comments or in writing an essay, we'd love to hear from you. So let me ask everyone to speak for about 3 to 5 minutes, very short, tell you a little bit about what they're doing, and we'll go on. So without further ado, Paul Marienthal.
Hi. I'm going to speak for just a moment on history. I think I'm the oldest one here, and my lifetime spans the Civil Rights Movement. I was born in 1949. So my life has gone through what is essentially the Civil Rights Movement, women's movement, the anti-Vietnam movement. I was asked to speak about protests and the idea of protest. I'm not going to take up this particular topic, but I'm interested in the question of protest because I've seen many that work and some that don't work. And what I would say to you, study. Be aware that good information really matters. If you're going to take a stand about this and you're going to convince people, which is ultimately what you need to do, what the world currently needs, and it needed 60 years ago when I was born, was a different story. A different story about race, a different story about homophobia, a different story about what constituted a person and people. That's storytelling. A lot of protest is telling a different story, right? What you're doing is telling a story that gets out into the world. A story about who has intelligence, who has a right, who has power, who doesn't have power. It's important that the information be correct. Please get your information right. Study. Do what you're doing in your classes and get the information right. Look at the history of economics. If you simply speak from your gut, know that there will be consequences. The anti-Vietnam movement was incredibly important in stopping that war. I also lived through Kent State. Just so that you know, I don't know how many of you know about Kent State. After 4 or 5 years of very, very effective anti-war activity broadly in this country, one afternoon, the National Guard gunned down students your age. Just gunned them down. And the student movement stopped dead in its tracks. There wasn't one of us who didn't stand utterly shocked and saddened. It was a crushing blow, and in many ways, it's an incomprehensible thing when you think about it. When you think of how much energy right now is being discussed about the assassination that the government allowed, that was against youth unarmed standing on a lawn. So don't be naive that there will be pushback and backlash. There absolutely will. So please get your information right.
Good evening. I was invited to take part in this discussion to present what was phrased to me as a student perspective on the Occupy Wall Street movement. And it's important for me to start my part out tonight by saying that there are many students at Bard involved in Occupy Wall Street. Many of you, I can see you right now. And I am not their leader or their delegate or their spokesperson. However much I may have worked with these students over the past few weeks, however much I may be in agreement with them very often. But to hear from a greater number of us, I'd like to encourage you to please come tomorrow to a teach-in that students organizing Bard Occupy Wall Street are holding. It's 5 p.m. in Klein Faculty Room, and there will be some open discussions, some research lectures, and it's really the best way to get to know the student perspective. So I hope you'll come, and I see many of you there. So I only have a few minutes for opening remarks, and I've already spent however much of it as I have apologizing for giving opening remarks. But to the point then, I wanted to introduce my student perspective tonight by talking a bit about participatory democracy. While the diversity of tactics and beliefs of those participating in Occupy Wall Street has been pointed out, been harped upon, been exaggerated, been deliberately misinterpreted, then satirized, and all this before the New York Times even noticed that there were some differently dressed bankers loitering in the lower Manhattan Park. The ability of Occupy Wall Street to house such a diversity is based in philosophical ideals the movement shares with participatory democracy groups the world over. Those ideals are based in open working groups and general assemblies, and participants who are entrusted only to represent themselves in decisions made on the principle of rule by consensus and cooperation. These have a long and nuanced history, from town hall meetings of New England to ACT UP and the early gay rights movement, to the Zapatista Army for national liberation in South Mexico. And I haven't time right now to talk about all of these, but essentially at their shared core and history, the Occupy Wall Street movement is an attempt to construct a better device than a corporate state by reallocating concentrations of power to all participants in a democracy, not simply the majority vote victor of a corporately funded, legally manipulated, and altogether unrepresentative election. Occupy Wall Street shares these methodological origins with the losers of neoliberalism and capitalism without bounds. Those who lost their homes in fraudulent mortgage exchanges just as they were paying to bail out those same very brokers. Those who have found themselves subject to police raids and placement on government watch lists for taking part in anti-capitalist advocacy groups. Those who must choose between foregoing college education and a lifetime of debt. Occupy Wall Street shares its origins with all and any who realize that the people's construction of alternate governments and occupations cannot stop, because there are no other devices through which one can challenge the power structures that perpetuates the tragedies I've just mentioned. These are, after all, profitable tragedies. And in our corporate state, there is but little hope in the masses attempting to implement even minor legislative recourses to the profit motives of the powerful few. So the masses have constructed an alternate government. It's as part of an American movement of small participatory democracies against looming multinational corporations that we're seeing Occupy Wall Street spreading to occupations of the people's space all over the world. Starting at least with the Alter Globalization protests of the late 90s in Seattle. This direct democracy is thus not about producing a list of reforms for our so-called representatives to consider, or producing our own representatives to debate them, because our manner of governance is going to require replacement before such efforts would ever be answered. We are watching as the deteriorating republic turns to police violence and extra-legal imprisonment to represent and protect its people. The whole world is watching. And so a new government begins.
I'm going to try to talk about, can everybody hear me? Okay, that's good. I'm loud. As Roger said, my name is Jennifer Derr. I teach Middle Eastern history and politics here at Bard, and I believe that I'm on this panel to sort of give an international perspective as to what we're seeing on Wall Street. And I'd also like to spend a few minutes talking about sort of the potential pitfalls of some of the strategies that we've seen based on the experience of 2011 in other parts of the world. And I think I wanted to start with a question today, and I want to pose a few questions that I don't yet have the answers to. And that question is that when we watched Occupy Wall Street begin, we saw this very conscious identification with protests in other parts of the world, but specifically with demonstrators in Tahrir Square in Egypt. And my work is in Egypt. I spend about 4 months of the year in Egypt, and I was actually just there for the summer. So I saw a number of these demonstrations in Tahrir Square. And I think the question that I want to ask is whether what's going on in Wall Street bears a more substantive connection to the revolutions that we've seen throughout 2011 that extends beyond a question of tactics. And when we talk about tactics, if there is a connection between these different oppositional moments, whether things can be learned from tactics in places of the world like Egypt that began their revolutionary cycle a bit earlier. Now, I should say that I begin this with a bit of skepticism after watching a weekend in Egypt that calls the quote-unquote revolution into question. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about tactics, and then I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about raising a few questions about the future of the movement. The first thing that I will say is that I do think that in terms of a revolutionary tactic, and as much as we make the revolution our own and its politics our own through our method, I think there's some real connections between what's going on in Wall Street and what has happened in the Arab world. There certainly is a conscious effort on Wall Street, and I should say Wall Streets in the plural, to unify protesters who are of different ages, different classes, different genders, different races, through this sort of sense of one demand. And this demand is more amorphous than it was in the Middle East, because obviously oftentimes in the Middle East, that demand amounted to the overthrow of a dictator. Now, what I will say is that while the unifying demand was a successful strategy, at least in Egypt, what we've seen in the period since Mubarak's overthrow on February 11th was that the unification of that demand is false in a sense. So groups that could come together to overthrow the government have now split apart again, and divisions in society are now re-emerging. So while that unifying demand is strengthening, I also think it has a certain set of weaknesses associated with it. I think that this idea of reclaiming space, as has been done in Wall Street and was also done throughout the Middle East, is a powerful idea. I think there is this sense that in a society which is spatially divided not only in terms of class, but also in terms of where our centers of business and government are, that the idea of a popular protest reclaiming space is a good one, and one that should be emulated. However, that said, what we saw in the Middle East is that the geography of protests tended to be concentrated in capital cities. And the question that I would pose to all of you who are involved with occupying Wall Street is how you plan on taking the geography of protests not only out of urban areas, but also into areas of the state, areas of the nation that don't necessarily identify with the urban space as it has been conceptualized in the protests. On a more cynical note, I'm really trying to only talk 5 minutes. I think that there is a sort of strength to the methodology that the Occupy Wall Street protesters have used. And when I say that, I mean there's a strength to this idea of consensus. There's a strength to the idea of not having a clearly identifiable leadership. But if we look at what's going on in the Middle East, I also think there are real questions of strategy that people need to begin to think about. In other words, after sort of, in Egypt specifically, after the overthrow of a leader, how is a revolution to continue? So in Egypt right now, there's a question as to whether a revolution at all has happened, despite Mubarak's overthrow, given the continued existence of a particular kind of elite and a particular kind of military rule. So I would ask those same things to people who are protesting on Wall Street in terms of the strength of a protest tends to be a weakness of the aftermath. And I think it's important to think about how a transition will be made at different points in a protest. I will also say that I think that there is something significant in all of these revolutionary moments, but there are real questions to be asked about whether they belong to the same revolutionary moment. And this is a question I ask myself often. So, there are commonalities in the sense that what people are protesting, the corruption that people protest against on Wall Street, and the formulation of politics that has emerged, that is something that's common. That is something that has been protested against in Europe and in regions of the Middle East. But on top of that, I'm thinking about 2011 as a year of opposition. I think we need to think about if we are all connected, and if there is a global movement, what exactly that means and what exactly that is, beyond a question of tactics and beyond a question of strategy.
My name is Eliza. I'm a student, and I was down on Wall Street the first day and night, and over the weekend I got to go down to Boston and see the occupation downtown there. And I believe that our political process has become so dominated by corporate interest and lobbyists that our vote may not really matter anymore. And this is a really important issue to me because I care about environmental issues, and I think it's a really important issue for more than just environmental issues as well. A lot of the issues that I had mentioned when I was on Wall Street included campaign finance reform, the millionaire's tax, corporate tax holidays, corporate personhood, grievances against the Federal Reserve Bank, and government bailouts, put stronger limitations on the federal government, and end the wars. And all of these really relate directly to the statement that politicians are controlled by the corporate interest. Now, a good example of this is the Keystone XL pipeline, which is being built by TransCanada that will go from the Canadian tar sands to the Gulf of Mexico. And the lobbyist for TransCanada, Paul Elliott, happens to be Hillary Clinton's former campaign staffer, and Hillary Clinton and the State Department determine whether or not this pipeline will be built. Another example is the Koch brothers, who have violated many laws. They've sold millions of dollars of petrochemical equipment to Iran, circumvented sanctions against Iran, and thwarted the U.S. trade ban. And the Koch brothers are able to do this because they know that even if they are fined, they will still be able to turn a profit. So these issues are really very closely connected, and for reasons like this and people's anger with things like this are why people began occupying Wall Street. Now, once the unions began endorsing the occupation, the protesters gained a huge amount of legitimacy. But the major criticism is still, why are they down there? What are they fighting? Why are they angry? And people don't seem to realize that there is a set of demands and there are legitimate reasons why people are upset. I went out and on the internet to look for a list of reasons, and on the Occupy Wall Street website, there is minutes typed up of the General Assemblies held every night, and there is a document that is currently 147 pages that includes a list of 8 reasons that are written really concisely, and it's open for everyone on the internet to comment on, so it's basically like an ongoing list of demands. I have that here if anyone wants to see it too. So I believe that if the movement were to come out with a single demand, and that demand could not encompass all the other demands, they would lose a huge amount of people who felt they could no longer relate. And I think this profit would be really detrimental to the protest. So rather, many organizations and unions have been able to find a way that their individual campaigns can relate to the overall message. And that's why so many people have been able to feel they could connect. Now, I believe that you can't fight corporate greed, and you can't put an end to corporate greed, which is something that a lot of people downtown are saying, not even downtown, but all over the country in these protests. But we can establish laws and reform existing practices that will hold our governments and our politicians accountable. And for these reasons, I think that the occupation is extremely necessary because it is bringing people together, like in this room, to talk about these issues. And pretty soon, our politicians and governments will be forced to address what's going on. And
my name is Steve Maslow, and as Roger said, I'm the chairman of the board of directors of the Hannah Arendt Center here at Bard. My Wall Street credentials are that I am, when Bear Stearns was alive, I was the managing director in charge of the equity capital markets group there for 16 years. I'm currently a private equity investor on Wall Street, and when I was your age, I was a student of Hannah Arendt's last research assistant and the author of her biography, Elizabeth Young Rule at Wesleyan. And for that reason, I know many anecdotes about Hannah Arendt, including her propensity to nurture and feed her students, which is why I passed out the brownies. By the way, it's not Hannah Arendt's recipe. It's from that other towering intellectual 20th century Nigel Lawson. They've been very useful to me, these brownies, in my victory over my struggle with contemporary issues like anorexia and other ones, like coping with hunger, which I think is one of the issues we're here to discuss. I am sad to say that on Sunday, on television, a new Muppet joined Sesame Street. Willie, the pink-faced Muppet, whose family faces food insecurity. And that was the subject of an hour-long episode. And I think the fact that such a thing is reaching out to the popular culture is an indication of what America has come to. I was down at Zuccotti Park. I'm using it as a metaphor for I wasn't actually at the park because I couldn't get there. I was downtown. I think that what they are staging there and what I like to feel part of is nothing less than a true Arendtian-style revolution. I think the people on in the protests, at least the ones I talked to, and there were many, refuse to accept that capitalism has defeated democracy. And I would like to agree with them. I think that their spontaneity, the fact that they feature plural participation of many people in what Hannah Arendt used to call action in concert, and that they're acting on human law as opposed to historical law is indicative of the genuineness and the authenticity and spontaneity of what's going on here. I think that many people have also become upset, at least in the media they have, about the seeming disorganization of these protests. That there is no one message, or there are too many messages, or the only one that seems that the New York Times anyway, and the Wall Street Journal will pick up on is the 99% versus 1% message. That it's very messy, that the people in the protests lack media savvy, they're not on point, they don't have telegenic leaders, they don't have leaders at all. And the other trappings of our culture. Our culture has become a hotbed of social rest. And these people are doing something about it. I think all of these things taken collectively, standing a little bit outside it, although being from Wall Street, it's hard for me to stand completely outside it, is that the people in the streets, and I think yourselves and myself too, I think we know something, we know what we don't know. We know that something is very rotten in the state of Denmark, and the core of that rottenness is Wall Street. And that is because Wall Street is basically the engine of income inequality in America. And income inequality is essentially what we're talking about. The rich are too rich, and the poor are too poor. The reason the characters on Sesame Street is that, depending on whose statistics you believe, 1 in 5 families in America now faces hunger. This is the richest nation that there ever was, whose very foundation was the notion that abundance and not scarcity might be the rule of the day, and 1 in 5 families now in America faces hunger. This did not happen by accident. The transformation represents and is the residue of the repeated and aggressive application of political power. I think, and that power was emanating from Wall Street and its money. Some of that power has been directed at removing existing regulations which have been designed to protect, or they were designed against speculative excess and conflicts of interest, which is why, as was just pointed out here, a former Clinton staff director is now going to influence the decision about whether or not we build a pipeline across the length and breadth of the land and destroy everything in its path. The net effect of Wall Street's concentrated power application is not what they claim. It is not. We do not have an idealized free market in which to play. That is not the case at all. What we have now is a tilted field which favors those who have power, who have connections, who lack scruples, and who can play in a very profitable but systematically risky game. I challenge anyone in this audience to name me an industry anywhere in the world, much less the United States, that is better at privatizing assets and socializing risks than Wall Street. In fact, that has become the name of the game. Okay? We have, in our time, the central problem here, and I think at the core of the protest, and to pick up on something that Paul said, it is very important to know your statistics if you're going to fight this fight. We have a hyper-concentration of income. The protesters that I met carry on about 99% versus 1%. I say to you that the protesters understate. It's actually 0.01% of the population that controls the assets, but I'll come to that. The share of income which has been earned, and I'm indebted to Piketty and Saez for these statistics, the share of income which is earned by the top 1% of our population increased from 9% in 1974 to more than 23.5% in 2007. Think about that. The last time such a disparity existed was in 1928 on the eve of the Great Depression. But as I said, I think the protesters understate. It is the richest 0.1%, 1 in 1,000 households, okay, 0.01, sorry, 1 basis point, okay, 300,000 people in the United States who collectively capture more than $1 trillion a year in annual compensation. That works out to about $7.1 million a piece. Think about that. 300,000 people earn collectively about $7.1 million a piece. And if you read Warren Buffett's letter to the Journal and the Times, you realize that these people pay a net effective tax rate of about 17% a year. Okay? So figure that out. If 300,000 people earn $7.1 million and pay an average effective tax rate of 17%, they're paying $361 billion a year in taxes. If they paid a normal tax rate, the normal federal, normal, okay, at the lowest rung is about 38%. And mind you, if you're a resident of New York City, you pay more, but okay. let's do 38%. If they paid 38% like everyone else in America, they would collectively be paying $810 billion a year in taxes. The deficit, the difference between what they should be paying and what they are paying is just under $450 billion. $450 billion would solve a lot of problems this year in America. Don't you agree? And we might start with hunger. But anyway, that's a different thing. So, why am I saying this? I'm saying that's just one statistic. I could give you many more. I'm holding myself back to keep myself short. I do think it is important to arm yourself, to be aware of these things, to be sympathetic with the protesters, even if they're not so articulate. It's okay. They know something's rotten. They're feeling it. Okay? There's a very famous line in Inferno. I wailed not, so inside I grew to stone, and others cried. I don't think we want to be amongst those people. I would urge you to join the protesters in any way you can. You can go down there. I realize it's far, and studying is probably a higher priority for you. And I agree with that. But there are things we can do in our everyday lives. I wrote about this on the blog the other day, especially young people regarding the internet. If you're not paying for what you're using, you are the product. Okay? If you're not paying for it, you're the product. Be very mindful of that. Go on Google, go on the privacy settings, and don't let the advertising companies have your data. Become a collective pain in the ass. Do not obey corporate America. Okay? I know Roger disagrees with me. I would urge you not to pick up after yourselves at McDonald's, Burger King, and other fast food restaurants. These corporate shareholders are not paying their workers. They don't pay them benefits. That people are slaving away there at $7.50 an hour. It would be okay if the shareholders of McDonald's had to hire a few more workers to pick up. You don't have to do it. You don't have to subsidize the shareholders of McDonald's or Burger King or anything else. And when you're at Home Depot and places like this, please don't use automated checkouts. Okay? Please wait in line. Put up with the surly service. These people are also standing on their feet for minimum wages without benefits. Put up with it. It's okay. Okay? Don't give in to corporate America. Don't let them make you into a atomized, automated thing that they can count on to behave in a predictable way. And very importantly, also, any representative, any elected representative of yours, please drop them a note and put in whatever language suits you that you are unhappy about income inequality in America. This is the issue of our time, and that is what these protests are about. Thank you.
So I'd like to thank the panelists. I think they had raised many of the issues that are at stake. I'm not going to give a full presentation. I think that income inequality is the issue. I think you need to get your facts right. I think the protest really does risk being delegitimized in certain ways. A, when people spout false facts, and B, when it seems to not be serious. I think we have two very serious representatives up here who gave interestingly different presentations, and I hope you pick up on their differences and maybe ask about them. I'm going to open it for questions now, and we'll try and have the kind of conversation that you deserve. So, questions. And there's a mic. Dan has a mic for questions. There's one in the back there, Dan. Stand up, please.
Hi.
And say who you are.
I'm Nellie Barber. Hi. It kind of seems like all of you are talking about education and awareness, and we're all sitting in this room at a very expensive college, and how do we bring that to the protests? Do we just do it with ourselves being there, or is there a way to sort of get what you've all been talking about there, an articulation does what this is doing right now. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Of the movements that I think have been most impressive to me over my life have been the women's movement. It started very tightly, very small, and very locally. And I would say to all of you, have this conversation, get your facts right, and go and have it with everybody in your life. The question of class is somehow got here last. I don't know exactly how. It's underneath everything. Race, homophobia, women's movement, all kinds of movements over the last 60 years. Somehow class and money talk got left out of the conversation, extraordinarily so. In the 60s, when we all went crazy and stomped around in mass numbers, millions and millions, and 10 years later Ronald Reagan was elected and crushed it. By law, the laws that happened in the 80s absolutely crushed the psyche of the 60s. And it happened very quickly, very swiftly, and very legally. And how that happened is because somehow I don't think we figured out how to speak to our parents and our cousins and the elders. We had a ball, but we didn't figure out how to tell the story effectively. The women's movement figured it out. They went door to door to door to door to door. They gathered in small groups and they talked. And they got their story straight and they got their strength and they had a lot of backing. And so what I would say to you, this question of nothing will happen if you just have a useful party and enjoy it and get your and protest. What you need to do is actually have intelligent conversation with everybody around you. The people who maybe are a little resistant, the people who have investments, people who are retiring, people who have money, people who need to give some of it up. And you need to have those conversations in a way that isn't a screaming match, that doesn't make people recoil. Because the reaction to this in 10 years could be horrific. Honestly, it could. The 80s was a disaster for this country. It was a disaster. We're still reeling from the effects of Ronald Reagan's presidency.
Okay. I just wanted to say something really quickly, which is, so last Wednesday there was a national student walkout, okay, at 4 o'clock. I was teaching and nobody walked out, which I was happy about in one sense, but in another sense, I think that there's something, part of being in solidarity with something is behaving and feeling as if you are in solidarity with something. And part of what makes a protest effective is to make it tangible in these spaces in which it is not tangible. So, we live in a bubble in the middle of the woods, but if you want what's going on at Wall Street to feel tangible here, then you have to behave in ways that are different and that make it feel as if that kind of protest has come to this campus. And I think, like Paul said, I think part of that is not writing over issues of class, and part of that is starting a set of conversations. But I think another part of it is figuring out how to make BARD a scenario that is oppositional and in which you feel like the protest is not just in New York, but it also exists here.
There's a lot of people here who want to respond. So maybe we bring in some other questions and then let people respond as they go along. Yeah.
Hi. My question is to the last speaker. I'm sorry, I forget your name. Steve. So it seems that you're very empathetic to the cause that's going on down there right now, and I'm sure there are many other people in the business community, in Wall Street in particular, that support what they're doing, and at the same time work there. It must be hard for them. But my question, though, is how many, and I know you can't speak on behalf of all of Wall Street, but your colleagues that you know, that you work with down there, what is your sense of how they feel about this movement that's developing? Are they indifferent? Are they skeptical? Are they supportive? And how is that playing out amongst your own sort of microcosm within Wall Street?
I think Freud once said that the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. That's how they are.
Let me add to that. And this goes to what Paul was just saying. I was at, as with many people, I was at Yom Kippur celebrations this last weekend, and I asked a number of people who work on Wall Street what their real actions were, and they said, not much. Don't think about it very much. I think a lot of you think this is very important right now. And maybe it will become important. And it seems like it's growing, and it is growing. But one of the things I think we have to realize is that so far what you've done is taken over a couple of parks. And this goes to the space issue that Jennifer was talking about. Pushback will happen when you actually do something that threatens people, which you haven't done yet. Not saying you should or shouldn't, but right now, it's utter indifference.
I would say that if you wanted to do something when you leave this room, you have a tool at your hands that was not available to prior generations, which is, of course, internet. Just write a note to someone that maybe you haven't spoken to in a while and say, why does Warren Buffett earn $38 million a year and pay a net effective tax rate of 17%, while his secretary, who earns $40,000 a year, pays 38%? Simple question, okay? More and more people have to think about this. Not that Warren Buffett is a bad guy. He actually wrote letters to the papers and said, this is ridiculous. This is absurd. But it is something to think about. I think raising consciousness about this is something that you can really do and will really help the protest, because when people think about that long enough, they'll start to think about other things too, and they'll, go down there. The strength is in acting in concert, not in just being aware of things. I mentioned the other things I think you should do.
I just wanted to respond mostly to you, Roger, and just say that I think what's happening actually is very important already. We saw 700 people get mass arrested on the Brooklyn Bridge. There were more mass arrests this weekend in Massachusetts than there have been for decades. And what's happening is so far small and peaceful, and I don't think that there's anything necessarily wrong with that. I don't think this needs to lead towards violence, to lead towards change necessarily. But if you don't think that this is important, then look at how hard all of the media structures are trying to ignore it. And look at the articles they write that try to divide us. I know they wrote an article where they mentioned Bard students recently, where they said, why are Bard students there? They're wealthy people, they shouldn't be there. They're trying to divide you. They don't want this to happen. And if this wasn't important, those tactics wouldn't be employed. There's something that happens when people together act in a public space and create a democratic structure. And it might just be a park, but those parks are getting bigger. Now it's Washington Square Park. Times Square is next. The fact is that the space that these democratic structures are taking are expanding. The scope of these democratic structures are also going to expand. They're growing in cities by day, and you do have to start somewhere, and yes, you should always start with peace, and in my opinion, always maintain peace as a structure for implementing democracy, but that doesn't mean it's not important yet. Look at the arrests, look at the abuse, and look at how hard the media tries to divide and ignore at the same time. Something is happening that other people do not want to be happening, and it's a sign of importance.
Today I was speaking with one of my friends from high school who happens to be a conservative, and we were discussing this movement, and he went to school in Boston, and he was not at the protest, but he witnessed what happened in Boston on Monday, and he told me that to him it seems like at this point just the leftist equivalent of the Tea Party. And my question for you is how do you suggest the Occupy Wall Street movement progresses to avoid that parallel, that kind of association with something as just one party, because I believe that's very antithetical to the idea of 99%.
Yeah, I can see. I've been on the internet. There are a lot of advertisements, sort of, I'd say, that are made by like freelance filmmakers of the protesters in Zuccotti Park, and I've heard that before, that this is sort of the leftist Tea Party, and those videos address it in a way by saying it's not about, Democrats or Republicans, and in a way it's not, but I definitely can see how it is. If I had to guess, I would say that a majority of people, when I was down there, were extremely Democratic. There were some Republicans, and they did identify themselves, but it's, in my opinion, very much a democratic movement, especially like young people.
I think there's a shorter answer to your question of how this movement can avoid becoming the Tea Party, and it's don't get bought out. And I think what you saw happen with the Tea Party movement, however good or bad you thought its origins were just, you saw the Koch brothers use that and basically like channel it into just a particularly muscular arm of the Republican Party. And I think that's something that won't happen with Occupy Wall Street, is sort of that implementation into a greater political party, because that's sort of the whole point of direct democracy. Direct democracy is about representatives of the individual as opposed to political parties, and about how when you have representatives as part of political parties, they're always beholden to other interests that are not synonymous with the interests of the individual. So at the very philosophical core of what a direct democracy is about all of this occupation culture and history that Occupy Wall Street belongs to is completely antithetical to simply selling out to a corporate-owned political party. So I don't think it's a risk if the movement stays true to its directly democratic ideals.
Let me just say one thing about the myth you're battling here is the myth of having. It somehow became a truly, deeply heroic act in this country to have a lot. That's a myth. That's a story. There's many other possible stories. Compassion is one, generosity is one, connection is one, playing a lot, breathing a lot of air. There are all kinds of things. Warrior culture used to be much more powerful than having. Lots of cultures have had the strongest one, not the richest one, as the hero system. So you're battling a myth. And from a fact standpoint, it's extraordinary that the Tea Party was born out of an era in which Republicans voted against their own interests in wide numbers. The people who elected George Bush last time were the people who were most staunchly holding on to the myth of the American dream, even as they were electing people who were becoming super rich at their own expense. It's an extraordinary blinding of their own interests. Your challenge is how to tell a different story. It has nothing to do with Republicans and Democrats. It has to do with fairness, it has to do with generosity, it has to do with connection between people. Don't get sucked down into a conservative, Republican, Democratic story. That's a dead end. Just stay out of it and look people in the eye and talk about what does it take to make a community.
Could you put the mic here? We can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. And Tom Boylan here as a shop steward as well. We negotiate contracts for our workers, so it's a very difficult issue for us. Our kids get to go to a doctor, we get a contract. And there's a lot of discussion about power here. I did notice that there's not a staff member now, or among most empowered people on this campus. But one place that you do have power is right here. And you talk about knowing your facts. Well, do you know what your charter workers pay? Do you know that your security guards don't have a contract? So, this is a wonderful esoteric conversation, but there's a reality on the ground here. So I was just wondering if you would comment.
Do you want to tell us what they make?
$9-10 an hour?
9, okay. There's a current effort right now in New York to have a living minimum wage, I think, of $10 an hour or $11 an hour. There are many things to be said to that. One, you're right, we don't have a staff member on the panel. We could have, why didn't we? The answer is, for better or worse, I imagine it as an academic-oriented panel, not, that doesn't mean that the staff here aren't involved in the academics of the college. They are. So I thought of academics, and that may be.
I just feel that we're the invisible reality.
I think that's a fair statement. It's also a fair statement to say that the middle class is becoming an invisible reality in the country, or a non-reality. The percentage of wages as part of our economy in our country is down to about 45%, which is the lowest level in history, down from almost 49% in 2000 and down from 54% in 1970.
You're talking about wages as opposed to capital gains?
Wages. What this means is that the actual working people, what they earn in this country, as opposed to investment income or government entitlements, is at the lowest level in the history of this country. This goes to the hollowing out of the middle class, to the hollowing out of the idea that you can work and have the expectation of a good and secure lifestyle. To me, that, along with the fact that going along with that are the facts that Stephen Maslow was stating before, which is that CEO income in this country is now on average 350 times the income of their workers, whereas it was, 50 times that, I think, in 1970. The point is, we have had a radical breakdown of the middle class in this country. It has happened for very particular political reasons, and people have been completely passive about it for a long time. I think what's exciting about the Occupy Wall Street movement, what was exciting about the beginning of the Tea Party movement, was that people got active and got interested and got angry. There are a number of different issues involved in this. One is the issue I think you're raising, the issue Stephen Maslow and I are talking about, which is the issue of income inequality, of the fact that an enormous destruction of assets in this country happened in the 10 years from 2000 to 2007 or 2008, and nobody has been asked to pay for it criminally on Wall Street or elsewhere. Wall Street's not the only problem here. And let's also be honest, that it was something that most people in this country were thrilled about while it was happening, because we all benefited from it, or many of us. You can say that, but the answer is many people bought houses, they bought cars, credit was easy, they got student loans, things were flowing, and people looked the other way. Now, they're not. And I think there's a real difference between the people who are engaged in this movement now because of economic issues, who are hungry, who are worried about job security, and people who are interested in direct democracy. They both are important. I'm not sure they can be made to go together, but they're both important. And to a certain extent, you have to set your priorities. And if you want to win one, you might have to give up a little bit on the other. And to me, the existential question for the United States right now is one of income inequality. If this income inequality is not dealt with, if we don't restore the middle class, the country will, who knows exactly how it will manifest itself, but the wealthiest people in this country will basically have very little at stake in preserving the functioning institutions of the country. We're creating what's now being called a barbell economy, a lot of money and power on one end, and a lot of money and a lot of people on the other end, and the middle class being hollowed out. That, to me, is what this Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street, could and should be about. I understand that there's also a lot of interest in the participatory democracy aspect of it. I would encourage you to focus on real economic issues, at least as a first strategy. That's a lot more people in this country care about that than care about direct democracy, for better or worse.
I want to say something really quickly, but I think the question you asked also goes to the heart of something more important, which is how we all conceptualize community. And I think that on academic campuses, those communities continue to be stratified by a number of issues. And if Occupy Wall Street is going to have any success, that success will be because, as I said, there has to be protest here and not just in urban areas and urban spaces. And part of that protest means rethinking community and how we all work together to create a better space for all of ourselves, and not letting those spaces continue to be stratified by the issues that historically have stratified them.
Just to you guys, I want to appreciate Steve and Tom for being here. I had been arguing at the college, and I did years ago when they changed the distribution requirements that there should be a requirement for materials and work. And I will say to every student here, and I've been saying it for a long time, I think there should be a component of work, because I think that we talk a lot about work in the world, and a lot of us don't know how to work, really. Work is a very special kind of activity. I read a book this summer that moved me a lot called Shopcraft and Soulcraft, which is about a defense of manual labor by a very smart guy. I feel very strongly about it, and I urge you all two things. Do some work with your body, and appreciate the guys who do the work around the college. Actively, thoughtfully. As far as I know, there's nothing invisible about what you do, and I'm sorry that you feel that way.
I just want to add really quickly, if you feel invisible and you get paid $9 or $10 an hour, that is crazy messed up. And you should come to Occupy Wall Street, because that's the whole idea behind direct democracy. Is there's not an invisible group. Everybody there is like horizontal, and that's why we have like general assemblies to discuss this and to actually share like individual experiences. And to a certain extent, even universities have like bad power structures that create invisible groups of people that shift around. And I think what Jennifer said is right, is we need to bring that same spirit of horizontal direct democracy to Bard, because that's crazy and terrible, and that should not be happening. But these are ideals of direct democracy that actually apply, that aren't just an esoteric conversation. And a friend of mine just held up a sign that said student labor dialogue. A lot of them are also also part of Occupy Wall Street, so I don't know if that sways you, but you should know that.
We've been arguing these issues for years. It's not new to us.
Hey, same boat, dude. But that's awesome. Let's go debate them down there in a horizontal democracy in a direct space where nobody's invisible. A lot of people down there also have 9-to-5 jobs and families. I do not have a 9-to-5 job or a family, but you can also take part on the internet. I have a family. I have an older family. Excuse me?
Let's do Occupy Bard.
If you wanted to do something that would make a difference, why don't you all put together, take some money and create a fund to supplement their income. If you want to do something, do it. You have to sacrifice to make change. So, put together a fund and supplement it. The guy's working for $9 an hour without benefits. Who ever heard of such a thing? That's economic slavery. It's very nice to use all these highfalutin words about building community, but if you want to do something, chip in.
Ask your parents to ask the college to
chip
create
in,
a supplemental fund.
Honestly, we've come to the point now where you have to do something. The man told you what his situation is. Do something about it.
Well, it's not like building ground workers are better off than most workers on campus. We have a relatively good contract. Our family health coverage is underpaid in the next negotiation. But there are other workers who don't feel empowered to speak up.
I'm talking about that. Yes, I'm entirely sympathetic to what you're saying. What I'm saying, it is not enough to simply say, okay, we're going to build a community. If you want to do something, sacrifice it, do something, chip in.
Yeah. But I think there's another, I used to teach at the American University in Cairo. The students and the staff just went on strike together. Everybody, there are tangible ways in which to build community and actually have your demands met because you work together. I don't think it's abstract.
Next question.
I just wanted to say these don't fully understand why they're there. They're getting behind the movement without really knowing why they're getting behind it. And I'm wondering, in one way I want to say that's a good thing because there's power in numbers. So it's okay, but I also want to ask how you feel about that because it's not entirely right to be there and not know why you're there because people are asking them questions and they're giving them weak answers and those are going into publications that everyone's reading, which is why the public is really confused about this event, or a large portion of the public is. And so do you think there needs to be some kind of manifesto or something like that the public can read and really know the facts and what's going on down there? And do you think it's okay that people are getting behind the movement? Yeah, exactly. I didn't even know that was out there.
It is out there, but it's only a proposed manifesto because the movement, is not going to, at this point, accept any official lists. Everybody can propose things, and even lists can be ratified by the General Assembly, but no list is ever going to become, law or official. And that's the idea of a movement, is a movement can adapt to different interests and changes as things goes on. Those demands may change. As to your point about, do people know why they're there? That's why we have this panel of people. I'm glad you're here. I know you were there last weekend. Awesome. Is the idea is that the onus is really on us to educate ourselves, and it's been made obvious to us that the mainstream media is not going to help us do that at all. This is really on us to look at the history of what is direct democracy. Where do these occupations come from? Why do they spring up? What are the objectives? There's culture and history to this that's rich and nuanced that you can read about and learn. And that onus is really on us, especially in an academic environment, to get up on. And we can totally do that. And we can also, go and spread word of that when we're down there to other people who don't seem to know why they're there. I was talking with my friend Stephen the other day about this, and he pointed out there were probably trendy hangers-on at the civil rights movement. That probably happened. It wasn't Stephen, actually, it was Carrie. It doesn't matter. But the point is that that's an inevitability. But we can amend that by being educated ourselves and by spreading that education with other people, by showing them that there's a real strong and sound philosophy behind when people take a public space back for themselves and create a democratic structure alternate to the just poisoned power structures of our government. And it's a really beautiful knowledge that we can share.
Hello, there we go. My name is Jesse Barlow, and I wanted to sort of, first of all, I think a lot of people my age, and especially me myself, doubt the power of the democratic system for us to make a change on an individual scale. You know, like how we toss up our hands and say, our vote doesn't count, and stuff like that. And it got me thinking about how we participate in perpetuating this corporate power. It seems that our very lifestyle, the fact that we shit into drinking water and that we, live on a power grid that has to burn billions and billions of barrels of oil just to stay on, that this really helps perpetuate the oil industry, the food industry, the very powers against which we're saying are big source of income inequality. And maybe I've got that wrong. And I don't know much about neoclassical economics, but it seems like supply and demand has a lot to do with this. What do you guys think is the extent to which our own individual lifestyles help perpetuate the very problems we're boo-booing?
I think the answer is a lot, as my colleague here just whispered. The problems we have are deep, and they're varied. The idea of direct democracy, the idea of, as Paul was talking about, the feminist movement, of consciousness raising, of meeting with groups, of talking about it, talking in public with other people you agree with, but also people you disagree with, is the way you can bring change to the world. It is an important part of your life, your public life, and your obligation as a citizen. And so, to the extent that will happen, and that you go and talk to people you disagree with as well as people you agree with, that you try and understand people who are working for a living and can't get to the protest. You understand the fact that the protests have largely been racially homogenous, that they've been of a certain class, and they are being discredited for that. The article, which was not in an American newspaper, the Daily Mail, which is, by the way, not a mainstream media source, is trying to discredit the protests as being elite by pointing to the fact that they came from Bard and that they were wearing designer jeans. They're going to be discredited. The point is you have to go out and raise consciousness and talk to people. That's the only way you change people's real behavior. There's a second issue here, which is that in the last 15 to 20 years, this country has gone through a political crisis where a political system has been taken over to advantage a very few people at the disadvantage of the vast majority. And I do think you need to keep those two issues related but also separate, and understand that you can build huge coalitions on the second quite easily, and on the first it's going to take a lot more work.
Talk about it. Capitalism is infinitely flexible. That's why it's so powerful. It has the capacity to stretch in every direction and absorb everything. And what it produces is desire. Speaking exactly to you. Capitalism is fabulous. The entire market system is designed to create desire. And desire then fulfilled in buying and making commodities. We are all subject to this. We are all influenced to a greater or lesser degree by the swirling forces of marketing that makes us want stuff. That's what it, and it can turn anything into a commodity. Love, sex, laughter, desire, sexual desire, anything. It turns it into a commodity. It's a fantastic thing. You have to be impressed with that at some level. That's the capacity for this system to turn into products, everything from crying babies' laughter to anything else, is really amazing. The onus is on each one of us to resist that desire. That's hard. It's very facile to say, well, I'm not subject to it, but we're all subject to it. I'm not without my market-driven desires. I do my best to not give in to them, to not buy crap, to not have loads and loads of it, but I have more than I wish I did. I have way more than I did 20 years ago when I left graduate school in my Dodge Dart and everything I owned in it. I wish that's the way it was again. So, where is it? It's in each one of us to step outside and be humble about how this culture creates desire in you. Don't get sucked down into stuff.
Thank you. First, Matt, on something you said earlier, Occupy Wall Street as a movement has tacitly brought itself into a certain number of statements and aesthetics relevant to the wars we've experienced in the last decade. In that respect, how do we come to a place where occupation is over? We don't even have a full instantiation of who we are as an individual entity, which is at the same time inherently multiple in its expression. But even more so, when do we know that this thing has happened? What is the full extent of this movement as an entity? We have earlier already had moments of expressing desires to move beyond the democratic system, but that is still the entity upon which we deal with many varying organizations of this world around us. Also, one slight question to something Paul mentioned earlier. You referred to the generation of the 60s and 70s as revolutionaries. Well, I might not be the only person here, but when you say that, you refer to my parents. You refer to people that I'm sure many of us are appreciative in our lives on a regular basis. But the question becomes, individuals who have experienced that movement, who are a major portion of our country, feel certain indifference, certain desires not to be motivated and not to activate again, and to want to have this revolutionary mode, which would be, in a certain sense, throwing off certain stuff, accumulations of character and personality that have experienced in this country in the last 30, 40 years. We seem to be also having a movement at the moment, a moment of reflection. This is all tied into a question of generating and moving a new national narrative that we have felt that there has been expressed at times as the end of this.
I hope you do better than we did. Really. I hope you hold the line better than we did.
Just to what you had said first, Max, about where does this end? I think the idea of having a movement that doesn't have a manifesto is none of us really know what's going to happen. You know, there is another revolution, another generation, of revolutionaries before us, but the ones I've talked to say the same thing as Paul is. We failed. And there was a woman who came up to me the other weekend at the park, and she came up and she said, what you're doing is what we did. But she's like, you're going to learn from what we did, and you're not going to make the same mistakes. You won't devolve into violence. And I hope she's right. And I hope that is what happens. As for, realistically what could happen, we're seeing, other directly democratic movements, like Zapatistas, now in a, ongoing peaceful negotiation with the Mexican government to, set aside an autonomous state for themselves. I don't know if that's what we're moving towards necessarily. Obviously, very different geopolitics between here and Mexico. But it's a nice thought, is the idea that we could live in a world where a directly democratic society would even be tolerated by other governments set up in the power structures that we're fighting today. I would, this makes me a sellout, maybe it is. I would settle for a much more compassionate democracy. Like, I would like to see some, nice campaign finance reform and, perhaps, a minimum income for everybody. And, I would like to see a lot of things like that before I say, you know what, let's just go be Zapatistas. However, if it comes to it, I will probably learn Spanish and move to their state.
I might answer your question differently. You would see an immediate change in policy. I think the goal of the movement would manifest itself in a change in policy. The president has recently introduced what the Wall Street Journal calls the millionaire's tax, but which a civilized group might call a fairness tax, which is to eliminate loopholes that allow people who earn a great deal of money to avoid paying taxes on it. That would do a lot. That would give the government the money it needs to provide people who can't help themselves with the assistance they need. I think that would be the near-term goal of the protest would probably be a change in policy, such as the one that the president has just introduced. I think the prior introduction of his attempt to establish a health care, affordable health care for all Americans, which, to Roger's point, would alleviate one of the greatest burdens on the middle class. That's an invisible tax on them. So those might be the manifestations of the movement. Or if the movement is successful, those would be outcomes.
So I'm going to direct my question towards Matt, because he mentioned it, and maybe also Paul. My question is, to what extent does a successful revolution necessitate violence? And Roger mentioned that for pushback, you need a sense of threat. And so how do you propose cultivating this sense of threat in a nonviolent way?
I don't like to think of things in terms of threat, just because threat just predicates itself on violence. And that's exactly what's trying to be used to crush this occupation, is that there's police brutality going on, there's extra-legal detainment going on, there's pepper spray of completely innocent people. And that's, I think, that's the threat. And I don't want to replicate that back. And I think very few people in the occupation do. It's a peaceful protest. That's actually one of the chants that gets said the most often, is that this is a peaceful protest. So as for how to create threat without violence, I think it simply has to come from the growing realization of people that they can be a part of a directly democratic society that does not need to ascribe to the power structures we currently live in. When people realize they have the ability to produce and act within a government completely exclusive to the terrible representation we currently settle for, I think that's when you'll see a real threat. I think when you see people constructing an alternate government, that's really the way that they're going to have their issues brought to the forefront, the way that they're always going to know their individual issues are being considered because they're the ones responsible for them, that's when you'll see a threat. When you see our government afraid of an alternate government that functions much better, that actually serves the people it purports to serve. I think that's the threat, and I think that can be a nonviolent threat. It's simply a matter of people joining up and realizing that there is a way to govern ourselves that's peaceful, based on mutual cooperation, and where your interests are never sold out to anybody else, or simply strategically divided into however many districts around the country.
I'm following him. I'm going to join him.
I wanted to say something to Matt, which, I respect a lot of what he's doing. But again, we should speak truthfully, and at least because otherwise you'll get discredited. The protests, for better or worse, have decided to break the law by not requesting permits. Now, I actually don't think protesters should have to require permits or get permits. But the law says they do. And what they've done by choosing to have illegal protests and not ask for permits is made it, A, impossible, for example, international students, but also people who aren't able to afford lawyers or have people get them out of prison or anything else, participate in these protests without the assistance or without, because they don't have the security. They're not convinced that whoever it is will help them out. They have a lot of, benefits and family members and other things. Some of them, not all, I'm not going to say. But the point is they've chosen to have illegal protests. And for the most part, the cities have tolerated that, right? Which has made a number of people, including people like in the ACLU, upset. Because if you're going to treat one group this way, what happens when the KKK or the Tea Party or some other group that you don't agree with so much wants to have illegal protests? Are you going to give them free water and free power? Are you going to let them sit for months? And these are issues that one has to address. And for the most part, the cities have backed off. But when you block traffic and do other things, yeah, you're going to get arrested. No doubt the police have overreacted. But let's be honest, the police always overreact. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be, and I'm sad about it. But it is a choice that the protesters here have made, and it's a choice they've made because they don't respect the government. They don't respect the law. And you can say that's a good thing, or you can say they should actually respect the laws. There's in the green here.
I actually gone to church. I went there this weekend.
Can you get a microphone?
I think I'm not. And I found it to be incredibly peaceful. And they actually have, even though they have filed permits, they've also respected the police. There aren't people that are going there and just being like, why don't you arrest me? Why don't you arrest me? They're having general assemblies where there's this thing called a human microphone. And so what happens is I say something, and then someone else says the same thing. And so it's really cool because the police ask them not to use electronic magnification of their voices. And so there are a lot of things that they're respecting the law, and I think that you're shedding a lot of negative light on it. And my question for you is really, do you support the protest at all? Because if you don't, why did you assemble this board? Because there are a lot of things that you're saying that sound really disheartening to a lot of people. And I think that we would have done just as well with a student teach-in where a lot of people got together, BARD alumni included, and talked about what we can do as a community, not just for our people who work here and who are completely ignored, but also for the general population. So, do you support Occupy Wall Street?
Teach-ins tomorrow at 5.
There is a teach-in tomorrow at 5, right? I was about to say that. I brought this group together to give a diversity of views because I think Occupy Wall Street has the potential to do great things. I think we are in a crisis in this country. I think I've said that a number of times. I think the crisis comes from a constitutional and political crisis. And I've been apoplectic at the passivity of this country for years. And I'm thrilled to see all kinds of people, young and old, getting together and doing something about it. I have great respect for that. I think I've made that clear. I think I can also make clear that I don't support or not support Occupy Wall Street in any simple answer. I think it has great potential. I think it has great danger. And I think it could also be completely irrelevant. I don't think that we can answer that question yet. It's not, and I'll be very honest with you, it's not really up to me. It's up to you guys. I'm trying to give you what little advice I can as someone who's spent a number of years thinking about the issues of politics and revolution, who's read a lot about it, who teaches about it, who thinks about constitutional law, and to say there is a spirit of hope and enjoyment that is absolutely essential to have in any kind of revolutionary movement going on. And I applaud that. I also want to say that so far, despite the gains that have been made, and I know a lot of you think they are, it hasn't done anything. It hasn't reached the point where you think it has reached. It's still early. I'm fully in agreement with that. I'm simply saying it's a long and drawn-out engagement. There's going to be setbacks. There's going to be celebrations. And I do think that, to me, it is deeply important that it succeed, if it's going to succeed in a way that restores some justice and fairness and balance to this country. If it becomes, there's a lot of ways it can't succeed. I think I've talked about some of them. So I think it's essential that you talk to people who disagree with you. I think it's essential that you talk to people who support you but have questions about it. And I think it's essential that you talk amongst yourself, but also reach out to others, as Paul said at the very beginning. And that's why I did not convene this to be a celebration or a condemnation, but a discussion. And I think it's happening. I know you're upset, but I actually think it's going quite well. We're going to give you a mic so that people can hear you. Dan?
I had bayonets against my chest and I never got arrested. I had a bayonet against my chest and I wouldn't let them gas me. Are you aware that there's an Occupy Wall Street at Kingston tomorrow? Senator Hinchy's office at 12 o'clock, and then at the office building, Wall Street, Kingston, not very far away. And to another point that you mentioned, Mr. Maslow, you mentioned box stores like Home Depot and McDonald's. Why not eat local, be local, support your nice Bar Street cafe in Tivoli instead of going to McDonald's, and be local, eat local, and get involved with your wonderful little farm that you have over here at Bard. Eat local, be local. Oh, no, I mean, but we have right here on board. Today they didn't do it because of the weather. But, they have a weed and feed on Wednesday nights, and people get together and go to the little farm over here.
Jennifer?
I just want to say something really quickly. I think that one of the reasons to have a conversation like this is because there's something to be said about learning from comparative lessons and lessons of the past. This is not the first protest against global capitalism. This in one way began in 1848, and in another way has failed every time and has tried to succeed. And so I think, in addition to thinking about what you want to change, you also have to think about, why a series of revolutions that started in 2011 are currently being crushed violently. What lessons you can learn from that. Whether 1968 was a success and why it was a success. There's a series of more serious and more historical conversations that we should all be having with ourselves at the same time while we're thinking about the future.
For me, Occupy Wall Street is a lot about accountability, holding the government and the financial industry accountable for what they do and what they're responsible for. And I think that in a lot of ways we have to be very cautious to hold ourselves accountable too as protesters. And I think that means respecting the people like the fact that all cops are not horrible, like some of them are trying to make a working wage. And I think that we're not being respectful of that if we hold illegal protests. Like, I was arrested, and the woman who arrested me wanted to be home with her family. She didn't want to be arresting me. And I didn't want to be arrested by her. And I feel like if the protests had been held more respectfully, like, on either end, like, I feel like the protesters have to hold the police accountable as well by, like, videotaping police, brutality and all that stuff, but we have to be aware that on our end, we have to hold ourselves accountable as well.
I would speak to that quickly. Hi, Allie. We were arrested together. And I would say that, it's absolutely true that, when we talk about we're the 99%, police are part of that as well. But it's also important to remember whose interests they serve. I don't know if anybody here knows what a paid detail unit is, but basically what that is, that's a New York bill that was passed while Giuliani was mayor that basically says that banks like Goldman Sachs can actually hire police on their payroll to come and protect them. And the biggest cause for them to do that so far haven't been robbers or anything, it's been this. And that's a terrifying concept. The idea that your taxpayer, hired, trained, armed police are working now directly for banks in some instances and right now on Wall Street. So yeah. Right, exactly. You can tell who they are because they're the ones wearing the white shirts. And the thing is, yes, you need to be respectful of these people because this is about solidarity and this is about, people who have been taken advantage of and people who have lost everything. But you also have to keep in mind that people's allegiances can be bought, and they are bought and sold by those who will always have enough capital to buy and sell interests.
And something really interesting, too, is that the day before the 700 people were arrested on the bridge, Chase Bank, I believe, donated a large sum of money to the NYPD.
It happened a while ago. They just reported it and thought that
it was still an unprecedentedly large donation.
It was in April.
Right. It's not the date that matters as much as just the fact that, why are they giving an unprecedentedly large donation to the police department?
Well, this goes back to the question of facts. We were talking before, when you get the facts wrong, it does just important. Hold on 1 second. Paul has to run, so we're going to let him go.
I'm on one of the zoning boards for my local town, and I have to go tonight. I just want to say I appreciate what you guys are doing. Be accurate. Speak to everybody. Speak to your folks. Speak to your brothers. Speak to your sisters. Have the conversation. Have the conversation about money. It's hard to talk about money, but have it. Be real about it. Look people in the eye. Don't scream at them. Listen to what they have to say. You need to convince people. You don't want to alienate people. You need to convince them. So if somebody doesn't agree with you, listen. Convince them.
This is a pretty functional question, but it's October 12th, and next is November, and then it's December, and it's January. What do you guys think collectively? I think both the weather and just the onset of cold really put an end to this. That's kind of a debate that I've seen talked about in Ducati's work and here, and just it's straight, the endurance of the movement, but what about just the weather? What's going to happen? How will that change functionally to the movement?
Matt just asked me to say something about the weather in Egypt. I do think there's a reason that revolutions happen in the spring. It's a much better time to have a revolution. But I watched people in the summer when it was 110 degrees outside, and there was a sit-in going on, and then Ramadan started, and people were fasting, and the numbers dwindled, but they held. I think there's a way in which the weather and the vision of the movement coincide. You know, people have to know how long they're staying and why they're staying and what a potential set of end results might look like. Because I think if that doesn't exist, then it will snow. It'll be done. But I don't think it has to at all.